celebration. And I wanted to do it at the temple, and I think next year I will. We'll all get together and
We celebrate Mamuna. We just didn't know it had a name.
oh, yeah. Just eating. Hi, everybody. So nice to have you all. Just again to remind you, if you're going to be in this class, that I always have a study sheet that I post next to the class that you can print that shows you what we're going to be looking at, some questions, some thinking. Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's always a mystery on this platform for me. Okay. Yeah. Good to know.
I can hear you. I can see you, except certain people are like refusing to show themselves, but I know you're there because I see your name. So I'm happy.
I'm going to go print out from my other computer.
Okay. All right.
Well, this one doesn't work.
Okay. So, but we're going to start because it's it's 12:07. We start with our blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav yitzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. So I see a lot of people have your microphones off. Even if you don't want to show yourself, you might want to unmute so that if you want to answer a question, or you can answer when we get there. So, as I said, we're starting with part 1, and this may take 2 weeks because there's 2 sections and they're very interesting in their dynamics. And it's the first menage a trois, unless you count, I was thinking, the snake and Adam and Eve as a menage a trois, meaning a relationship of 3, not necessarily sexual. But here it's Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. In the first section that we're reading, Abraham's name is not yet Abraham, it's Abram, and Sarah is Sarai. They haven't gotten the blessing where the hey, H, is put into their names. Abraham will be in part 2, and Sarah. And the H, or the hey, is also one of the symbols of God, or God's presence, or a name of God is the hey. So right now they haven't gotten that special blessing yet. And then there's Hagar, which can be translated as Hagar, the stranger. Hagar, the stranger. So, and she is the Egyptian maidservant of Sarah. And some midrash say that right before this story, which we didn't look at, Abraham and Sarah were in Egypt. And Abraham lied and passed off Sarah as his sister because he was afraid if he told if he told Pharaoh that she was his wife, he would be killed, because he suddenly realized in Egypt that she was beautiful, which is so interesting because it's like until you see something through someone else's eyes, you don't always appreciate it. So when they got to Egypt, he said she was his sister. And of course, Pharaoh took her into his harem, and all kinds of curses happened to Pharaoh, and he realized that this was his wife, and he sent them away. And the Midrash says that one of the things he may have done is given Hagar at that point as a servant or a slave to Sarah. And I've read another Midrash that she was actually one of Pharaoh's daughters that he sent. And, they had multiple wives, so they probably had, 100 daughters or lots of children, and he sent her. So we don't know the status that Hagar had before this story, but it could have been. Sarah means princess. She could have been an equal, but, before she was enslaved and sent off to serve Sarah. So we don't know. We do know that she was much younger than Sarah. Okay. So we don't know if she was pretty or not, but she was definitely, young, and youth has its own kind of beauty, as we all appreciate as we get older, that just being young is a beautiful thing. So we start with the first verse, which is chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. She said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go now, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So let's just, unpack that. What does that mean? All of this stuff. She had no children. She had a slave. And who did she blame? It's interesting because in the text, who has kept her from having children? It says, the Lord has kept me from having children. So even though women are, quote unquote, blamed for their barrenness, in fact, the Torah is clear that this is like a decision from God. So really a woman should not be blamed, is the mentality. Sleep with my slave and I can build a family through her. So what does that mean? Sleep with my slave and have a family through her. How would that be?
Didn't you tell us that they used to kind of sit, and when the baby came out of the woman, remind me now, but that's if Sarai was there, then it would be her child.
But also when we think of, sadly, even Negro slaves in America, who did the children of the slaves belong to?
The master.
They belonged to the master or the owner. And she was going to say, this would be your son, but we'll say this is our child. So just from the get-go, how do you think Hagar would feel about that? I mean, let's just look at it from multiple, we're going to look at the story from everyone's point of view all the time. So how would Hagar feel about that?
We
You're going
find
to have
out
a kid.
later
Yeah.
that once she found out she was pregnant, she felt at a higher place than Sarai.
Yes, but how about this idea of, you're right, and we're going to read that in a second. How do you think she felt about being told you're going to sleep with the master and your child is going to belong to the mistress? Roy,
Okay.
did you want to say something? No? Any point of it's your opinion. There's no wrong answer. How do you think she would feel about that?
I think she'd have some mixed feelings.
I think she'd have very strong feelings. What
Mhm.
would be the positive?
If she has the child of her mistress's master, she has a kind of dual, and she'll experience motherhood too.
Motherhood, and also her son's status would be raised because he's going to become an heir. So that's the positive. The negative would be that she would lose her child or she wouldn't raise it particularly. Abraham agreed. So how do you think Abraham felt about this? How do you think he would feel about that? The husband. Sleep with my young servant and have a child with her.
Depends.
Deal. If I've asked for it, ask him to do it.
Wait, raise your hand so I can see a call on you. Somebody just put your hand up if you want to speak. Susan.
Well, he's acquiescing to it. He's going to be able to have sex with his wife ordering him to do so. And with the younger woman, probably could. He'll be cured of some age. I guess not a bad deal. I mean, but, I think it's perfect.
Okay, so he gets to have sex. Yeah, Roy.
I think the important thing is that he gets an heir. I mean, yes, sex is important, but I think the primary concern is having a child.
I think you're right, especially since, God had promised him that he would have, his heirs would, be as multiple as the sand of the sea and all that. And he's had nothing. So he could probably think, okay, here's the answer to my prayers, that I will have an heir. So he agreed to what Sarah said. And after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. And he slept with Hagar and she conceived. So they had been waiting 10 years to have a child. Finally, she said, okay, let's, so was she thinking of herself? No, it seems like she was thinking of her husband and of their legacy, and yes, Jody.
I still think it's a little gross. Every time I read this, I think I can't see Sarah being like, terrific, go sleep with this younger woman. And No, I can't see her being like, oh, I love this baby like my own, like I think maybe it's her making a sacrifice, but I don't see her feeling that good about it.
I think you're right. I think she did it for her husband.
Right.
I think she did it for her husband. I think you're right. So she was saying, all right, I'm old and I know my husband is very unhappy and I'm going to make the sacrifice. But she probably thought she was doing a good thing. And let's see what happens. When she knew she was pregnant, this is Hagar, she began to despise her mistress. So why did she despise her mistress? Why? Why would she despise her mistress when she was pregnant?
Because they were going to take the child from
Yeah.
her.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
she gives
Linda?
up the baby.
Linda?
Yeah, it was the same thing because she has to give up the child.
Mhm.
But okay, I didn't even think of that. But she was lording it over Sarah also.
Yeah,
Why
that
do you
makes
think she
sense.
was doing that?
Because
Why?
Because she could get pregnant and Sarah couldn't.
She knew she could get pregnant and Sarah couldn't, especially if we believe the Midrash that she came from royalty or that she had been an upper class woman. Now, who's the slave or who's the one who's deficient? And she began to despise her mistress. And the commentators say she said nasty things. She was rude. She was rude to her in public. So she was a very hostile and, despising her, as we said. Then Sarah said to Abraham, and okay, here's the psychology. You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. She says to Abraham, I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Okay, so what is Sarah saying? What happened now? What happened once the actual reality set in and the woman was pregnant? Yes, who did she blame, and why do you think she blamed Abraham? Okay, she's saying, and what is she blaming? So look, when I first read this, I thought this is your fault that now I'm in this situation that she's pregnant and I'm not, even though that's irrational because it was your idea. But what the commentators say is she was saying, the woman is rude to me and you don't defend me. You don't say anything. You just let her get away with it. So Abram, he's like trapped between these two women. He's not saying anything to Hagar. On the other hand, she's pregnant. She's emotional. She's hormonal. She's carrying his child, which it's his first child. He's very excited. He probably is feeling very attached to her. On the other hand, his wife of 40 years, 50, how long? We don't know. Years and years they've been together, is saying, you're abandoning me. I did this for you and you don't even stick up for me. So Abraham is basically torn between the two women. And then Sarah says, may God judge between you and me. But, who's better? Your behavior is not, let God judge you. And I feel that I did this sacrifice for you, as we said before, and you're not standing up for me. And then what do you think Abraham does? If you can look ahead, somebody have the text there beside me. Linda, read it.
I do.
Oh,
I do. The slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled.
Okay. What do we think about Abraham's response?
Yeah, no responsibility.
No responsibility. Do we blame him? What do you think of him as he's a fantastic leader. He has a great relationship with God. He can argue with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, and not destroying them. And when it comes to these two women, he's throws up his hands and says, you do what you want. What do we think about that?
Typical.
What could he have done? What could he have done? What could he have done?
Well, he could have talked to
Oh.
her. I mean, this is consonant, consistent with his sleeping with Hagar. And he says, it's done, you handle it, that's understandable. He could have talked to Hagar.
He could have talked to Hagar. Roy, did you want to say something?
Let's have the council here and we'll talk
Okay.
about it. Or he could have sent her away.
Okay. Roy, did you want to say something? No?
Did you ask me?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's an abdication of responsibility, and it seems like it's sort of a standard human response. But he should have been a man, and you don't not put him in their place, but just sort of appreciate Hagar, but tell her that his wife is his wife, and that she made the sacrifice, and he's I don't know. I just, like you say, as it should have been handled.
Mhm.
Well, what's interesting in the Hebrew, and Miriam, if you look at the Hebrew, what the Hebrew actually says is, do what is good in your eyes. He doesn't say handle it like
It
it's
says,
translated.
"Hine shiftecha b'yadech, aseh la hatov b'einayech."
Yeah, do what's good in your eyes, which could hint that, do something that's right. But the word tov in there, do something good, suggests to me that he wasn't suggesting what Sarah ended up doing, which says, then Sarah mistreated Hagar. So she fled from her. And the commentators say she subjected Hagar to psychological and physical abuse. She abused her. And the Rambam says, that's Maimonides, that this was a sin, terrible sin, that she treated her this badly, and that Abraham allowed it. So Abraham, remains too aloof, which, later on in the Torah, it says, do not stand idly by in the blood of your neighbor, but we could take it all the way that when you see, to just turn his eye to this, turn his back to, I should say, his eyes away from this abuse, it was his sin too. These people are so flawed, and yet psychologically, they don't seem that unfamiliar. This is the way people deal with things. We know that abuse goes on in the home and one parent knows and the other one looks away or doesn't want to deal with it or doesn't know how to deal with it, or they say you handle it and they don't want to get involved. Susan.
Oh, no, I was turning up the light.
Oh, okay. I thought you were raising your hand. So, he just washes his hands of it, which is so surprising for this guy who has made so many bold steps in his life, but in his family dynamic. And we often see that people who are leaders, or political leaders or corporate leaders or whatever, and their home life is just a mess. They don't have the emotional.
Religious leaders.
That is true. They don't have the emotional sophistication, intelligence, or delicacy to handle it.
I have a question now, going forward. When he goes back to
Okay, it's hard to hear you, so sit forward. Yeah.
relate this to his
Who's that name?
Susan.
Is that Susan Nanus?
No, Susan.
Susan Ehrlich. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Relate this interestingly to his later behavior when he goes to kill his son under God's orders.
You're right. He doesn't argue with God either. Is that what you're saying? When God says sacrifice your only son later on, again, he doesn't speak up. So Abraham has some emotional intelligence deficits, or he's afraid to make waves on a personal dynamic. He's good in the big picture, but you're right. He doesn't speak up, and he suffers from that in many ways.
Susan,
Yes,
Miriam,
yes.
I think the Bible is so profound in its understanding of human nature. It's so much easier for someone to speak up for the people of Sodom, who he doesn't know, and he thinks God will do a great injustice to Sodom by killing all of them. If we find 30, 20, 10, and he can speak up for others, and so many people can, but they cannot speak up when it comes to their own issues.
I think you're right.
Such as sacrifice your son. He was quiet and he took his son the next morning and he left early. And the same with this. He said, I want peace in my household. I want shalom bayit. Listen, Sarah, do what you wish.
You're absolutely right. Very smart, very insightful. So then she runs away, and it says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that was beside the road to Shur. And the commentator says Shur, this place, was on the road to Egypt. So she was running home. She was running back home. And he said, the angel, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And this is the first time that an angel or God, the angel speaks through God, has spoken to a woman since Eve, when he said, what have you done? And also the commentators say it's a gentle way of addressing her. It's like, where are you? Have you come from? Where are you going? It's very kind, the way that Hagar is approached. And she says, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. And I find it interesting that there's no like, oh my God, an angel's talking to me or whatever.
Can I change that?
Very bad.
I'm watching this.
But that's not on this.
No, I'm watching it here.
Okay, I want to change that photo in a minute.
Okay, so, all right. And we don't know what the angel looked like because the word for angel in Hebrew is also means messenger. So it could have actually been a person, some kind of a person who approached her.
But ultimately,
if you have noise in the background, would you please mute?
Julie, it comes through on.
without
can you mute? Thank you. Okay. So
works with most PPO.
I don't want it.
Please get help.
Stop it. You're getting upset.
You can unmute. Okay. So then the angel or the messenger gives her a blessing, but he sends her back. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they too will be numerous. They will be too numerous to count. So the angel says, go back. Why do you think the angel says go back? I don't even have an answer to this. So I'm curious what you might think. Why do you think the angel wants, actually I do have an idea. Why do you think the angel wants Hagar to go back?
Because he wanted Abram to have a child.
To have a child?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you're right, even though he ends up being kicked out later again. But also perhaps, to give birth in the desert, or she wouldn't have survived. It's safer to go back home, perhaps.
How about the child to have a father?
That's good. Excellent. The child to have a father and to be raised in a community.
I mean, you hear that often when there's these contemporary stories. A relative or somebody will say, go back, look, go back with them, be together.
You're right. Oh, that's very good. Very, very perceptive. So go back, but I will increase your descendants so much that they too will be too numerous to count. So the commentators, a modern commentator says, this is like happens in Christianity, but in Judaism, way before this, annunciation by an angel about a great future for an unborn child, for a child. I mean, first we have this with Ishmael, That's the first one where an angel says he's going to be great, and we're going to read the blessing. Isaac has one, and I'm trying to think of who else is an angel talks about it. It doesn't come to mind, but there are a number of them where, oh yeah, Hannah, when she gives birth to Samuel, prophet. And again, an angel or a voice tells her that this is, is going to be, you're going to have a child. So this idea that outstanding children are, the mother gets a special communication, a holy, sacred communication about your child will be outstanding. Susan, unmute yourself. Susan, unmute yourself.
Samson's mother?
Who?
The mother of Samson.
Samson, right, also, yes.
Didn't get to be a Nazir, yes.
Yes. So that's sort of like a motif in the Torah, in the Bible, actually. And then he gives her this very interesting blessing. You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. So here's again the Annunciation. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. So in the word Yish, it's in Hebrew, it's Yishmael. We hear the word Shema, and we hear El. El is God's name, like Elohim, Eloheinu. Yishmael, God will hear, or God heard your name. God heard. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward his brothers. So this is an interesting prophecy. What do you think it means? He will be a wild donkey of a man. What is that? What do you think that means? Very free.
Stubborn.
Who said this?
Peg said stubborn.
Stubborn, yes, because we think of like a stubborn ass or whatever, stubborn like a donkey. But I also think if you think of that the Bedouins and the Arabs consider Ishmael their patriarch through Abraham, their descendant. They lived without boundaries. The Bedouins rode horses, and they traveled from place to place. They weren't in a pen, in a stable. We weren't contained like the shepherd's sheep. They weren't contained. They were, free. So this idea of you are a slave, but your son will be free. It's the freest of the free of all the different kinds of people in society. And his hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. That, I guess, means he will not be contained. That's for good and for bad. And he will live in hostility toward his brothers. I feel like some of this was written later when Israel was at war with some of the Ishmaelites. But, actually Isaac and Ishmael end up reconciling. I just want to see if there's a special commentary on that, where it says, yeah, he's talking about the unremitting tension, the tension between, the Bedouins and the farmers, or, the sheep herders and the farmers, the people who stay put and the people who are wild. We know that went on for centuries and centuries, where there was this tension between those who wanted to plant the land and keep the land, and those who wanted to just let their flocks graze the land and move from place to place. So that's what this is in reference to, a different kind of culture. And so Hagar gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me, she said. I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Be'er Lahai Roi, and still there between Kadesh and Bered. Okay, what does it mean to be seen? Why is that? What does that mean? And why does she find that so important and amazing and miraculous? What does it mean to be seen?
Because she was a domestic prior to that?
Still is, yes.
and she didn't feel that she had a role where she was being seen fully. She was just used, to be a slave and then used to have this child, and she didn't feel she was being recognized
as a full human being.
As a
I
full
agree
human
with you. What does it mean for any of us to be seen, to really be seen? How is that, Roy? Unmute yourself. Roy, unmute yourself. You're muted. Yeah. You're muted. Unmute. Maybe I can
Yep.
unmute. Okay, go ahead.
I think it's just a recognition that she's an individual, that she's a person.
Yes, I think it's true, but I think about, let's talk about the people who clean our houses. People who we see every single week. How many of us know where they live? How many of us have ever been to their house? How many of us even, have any idea of their living situation? I actually saw some television show about that, and then I realized I didn't even know where my cleaning lady lived. And I asked her, and I got everything. And then I actually drove her home once because I felt I feel I do now, seen her. She came, I think it was some, really bad murder show where they asked the people, where does she live? And they said, oh, I have no idea. It was this idea that there are people in our lives that we see every day that we don't really see. And, or we feel that we're not seen. We're in a category. Certainly older women, and maybe older men too, feel like, oh, I'm no longer seen. I'm no longer seen as a woman. I'm no longer seen as feminine. I'm seen as this old person, or they think I don't know anything or whatever. And we really know that we're all so much more than that. So I think Hagar really was moved that she felt seen. That was part of the blessing. Not only will I have a son who will be wild and free, as opposed to my feeling caged and restricted, but God sees me. And okay, yes, Susan.
So I think it's even, that was a good comment that you made, but this is God who is seeing.
Come closer, it's hard to hear you.
This is God who is, God who is seeing.
God who?
God who is seeing her.
God is seeing her.
Yes,
yes, it's good to be seen by God, but I think the actual act of being seen at all is very, what's the word? Gratifying, and you just feel more like you're recognized, so actually I think about when we have friends I have a friend that's like for 45 years, we're friends. When she looks, and I'm sure a lot of you have friends for many, many years. When they look at us and we look at them, we don't just see them today. We see them all the way back from our 20s and 30s and 40s. We see our spectrum. We really see them. And I'm sure with spouses too, who are married for many, many years, you see each other. You don't just see them today. You see the whole spectrum of the person. And that's a deep kind of looking at someone, which she felt was a blessing. So that is, all right. So she went back, and Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abraham gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born, which means what? If Abraham gave her the name Ishmael, what does that mean between Hagar and Abraham?
That God heard, really.
No, but it means she went back and told him the name, because this was revealed only to Hagar. You will have a son and you will name him Ishmael. So she went back and had some kind of reconciliation and intimacy with her husband, her owner, her patriarch, her whatever, the father of her child, because he listened to her. He listened to the blessing. She shared it, and he gave their son the name that Hagar was told. Only Hagar. God did not talk to Abraham about this. Abraham, just to Hagar. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael, which means how old was Sarah? Because she's 10 years younger.
76
years old.
76. And here's this young girl. and she just had their son. And we also know that, he circumcised Ishmael and Abraham himself. He circumcised all the men, and that was the covenant between God and the Abraham's, clan. At this point, it's just one family that are going to be our ancestors. So far, it's one person, Abraham and Ishmael, that's it. And they circumcised everyone. And my women's Torah study knows that we talked about this, that testimony and testament comes from the word testes, and that for some reason the man's genitals was a very sacred place to make oaths and to create this kind of
I remember that.
physical in the flesh covenant. And the penis was the covenant. So I guess that was a very important part of the anatomy in the ancient world for valuing things. If you
It
swear
still
on that,
is.
I guess you're really serious.
Still is.
Still is very, yeah. So that's part one of the story. In between, Abraham is then, as we said, he was circumcised, and the next part of the story, which we're not going to look at, but I'll just recap. Abraham's sitting in a tent, and the commentators say, Rashi says he was recovering from his circumcision, sitting in the tent, and he sees three strangers coming who actually are angels and messengers. And they're saying God and these angels came to visit him because he was sick. And from this, we learn we're supposed to visit the sick. This is from this particular story. And also he jumps up and he welcomes them and washes their feet and offers them food and drink. And from this, we learn that we're supposed to welcome guests and honored guests. And this is in both cultures, in Jewish and Arabic culture. The honoring of guests is considered sacred and very, very important. And he has Sarah make food, and they offer him food. And these three angels have an announcement for him. It's another annunciation. Sarah is hiding in her own tent, and they say, we've come to tell you you're going to have a child. Now, this is 13 years later, because that's when he circumcised Ishmael. So he's 99. And Sarah is 89. And they say, now you're going to have a child. And what is Sarah's reaction? As we know, she laughed. She laughed. And because of that laughter, when she did have a child, she named him Isaac, which means laughter. That is what the name means, because of that. So Sarah laughs, and God says, why are you laughing? Don't you think this can happen? And she said, actually, she was laughing thinking, oh, this old man is really going to give me a child. But she lied and said, well, I'm too old to have a child. So we see that you're also supposed to spare people's feelings. Don't insult them. There's also a great discussion in the Talmud about between Hillel and Shammai, who were the two different opposing schools of thought in the early Mishnah times, Talmudic times, which was like 100 CE, was around that time. And they had an argument about, do you say a bride is beautiful even if she's not at a wedding? Do you sing this song, which means, oh, here comes the beautiful bride? And the Shammai school of thought was much more strict to the letter of the law. We go by Hillel. And they said, no, you can't sing, here's the beautiful bride, if she's not beautiful. And Hillel says, yes, you can. First of all, the thing is every bride is beautiful, but Hillel's answer, which will make women laugh today, is like, once somebody has bought something, I forgot what it is that he bought. Do you tell him he bought a bad thing? No, you don't. You say it looks good. So it's like once the bride.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There's another one, is that a bride can be beautiful, just because she's getting married.
Yes, she's just beautiful because she's getting married. But you say it no matter what. You don't hurt a person's feelings. And we see here with Sarah saying, oh, I wasn't insulting Abraham. I was insulting myself. But she really was saying, this old man is going to give me a baby. He's 99. I'm 89. Of course, we know she did have a child. And the Midrash, I love the Midrash, it says that she was still young and beautiful, and that God refashioned her womb that had just for this event. And that in the town, like you always think of them living by themselves, but apparently they were in this big encampment and there were other people. The women were going to say, oh, it's not really her child, it's Hagar's, and she's just pretending. And so God, this is a Midrash, we know Midrash are like fabulous tales, made her milk flow, from her breasts to such a degree that she could suckle every baby in the town, in the area. And any baby who drank from her either became a wise person or a great warrior. That the milk was magical. Okay, so this is the Midrash. And now time passes and we get to part 2 of the story. And it's like 12:45. Do you want to go on, or would you like to, we could continue, or we could just pick this up next week. What do you think? Continue? All right, we'll continue a little. I don't think we'll finish the whole thing, but because it's really quite a lot of interpretation. We'll just read the text, and then next week there's all kinds of questions, and then I'll move on. So here, we can just start with this. It says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian. So now suddenly, this is interesting. He doesn't have a name. Suddenly he's demoted. He's just a son. And there's a commentary about that they don't mention his name. They just call him the boy or the son. Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she bore to Abraham, playing. Okay. So the word, literally in Hebrew, the word is misachek. And the only other time that this word misachek is using is later with Isaac and his wife Rebecca, when they say they are sporting sexually. And so Rashi says she saw him doing something sexual to Ishmael, was doing something sexual to Isaac. She looked out and she saw him playing with him. That's one interpretation. Others say he was just playing, what another commentator says, he was playing this game where he was saying to Isaac, run and I'm going to shoot an arrow and you find it, but he was actually trying to kill Isaac. These are all kinds of justifications for what's about to happen. Others say that Ishmael was playing, well, I'm going to be the head of the family. And so he was playing, bossing Isaac around because he was the oldest and the heir. And she said, Sarah to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son. Wait, sorry, getting dry. For the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Okay, so she saying they're not splitting the inheritance. So then we have to again think, what did she see? Was, was Isaac, Ishmael playing that he was in charge or whatever? But she goes straight to the inheritance. This matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. So what do you think distressed Abraham? There's a question. Did it distress him to say cast out the son? Or did it distress him because Sarah said what she saw? Was he distressed over the idea of getting rid of his son, or getting distressed over the idea that his son Ishmael had done something wrong? What do you think? What would you think? What would distress?
That he was going to be cast out.
He's distressed that his wife is asking him to do this. Now, what's interesting,
I think he's torn because while Sarah doesn't consider Ishmael her son, now that she has a son, Abram does consider him a son.
right,
So he's conflicted. Or I guess he's Abraham now, so he's conflicted.
exactly. But here's a question that I just came to me. Why doesn't Abraham ever say no? No, I'm not going to do that. He doesn't even consider saying no. He doesn't know. Again, it really reflects on Abraham's character. And all of our patriarchs are extremely flawed, which is so interesting. They're not like ideals. They are men and women with real human failings, which can be comforting and illuminating and sometimes annoying. You know, like, why don't you say there's no way? Peg, did you want to say something?
No, I just want to know why our leaders why they didn't stand up for what was really right.
They did sometimes, and sometimes when it came to it seems like their behavior is very human. So the wife this is a wife now with also status. She has a son now. This is the son they were blessed with by the angels, the one they were told, okay, you know, he's the one who's going to be the heir, and our descendants are going to go through him. And now she's saying, get rid of him. Actually, later we do know that Abraham behind her back gave Ishmael some things, but he couldn't confront her. So I have to wonder, what was their marriage like? Do you think? What do you think their marriage was like? They've been to Susan.
Well, I'm going to say something. You're assuming, or you're not assuming, stating that it is wrong for Abraham to turn him away.
I can't. It's hard to understand you.
Maybe I turn up.
Yeah.
Okay, I turned up the volume. So your position is it was wrong for him. I mean, can you hear me now?
Not really, unfortunately.
Okay, so then the other thing is, what if it wasn't wrong for him to send her away? He was trying to keep Shalom Bayit. And can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Shalom Bayit. And he knows there would have been conflict. There was enduring enmity between Hagar and Sarah. And now it comes to his his knowledge that Ishmael may have been fondling Isaac, because that was the same term for Isaac fondling
Rebecca. Right.
So who's to say he wasn't? He was still doing whatever Sarah said, but who's to say it was a wrong decision?
We don't know. Well, actually, God says to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Everything that Sarah says to you, heed her voice. For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed. So, God says, and this was Steinsaltz, who I talked about a few times ago, is very perceptive, says, heed her voice. It's not listen to it's heed her voice. And he suggests heed the pain in her voice, the upset in her voice, the feeling, the emotions that she's been going through, and listen to her, because Isaac will be your heir, but I will watch out and take care of the other ones. So in this God is actually reinforcing what Sarah said. The problem might be that she says, Sarah doesn't say, I want to protect my son, or he's dangerous, or I can't live with her. She says, he will not share the inheritance with my son. He will not be the heir to, and I don't know if it's just physical goods, but perhaps, the actual legacy of the people. So I'm going to stop here because it's almost 1 o'clock, and we will pick this up next week because there's a lot of